All right, introduction to Nietzsche. So we're progressing. This is the last stop of our happiness journey. Um, so actually, there are a lot of connections between Nietzsche and Stoicism, which we didn't study for the reason that Nietzsche kind of covers it. There's a very famous saying in Stoicism. I don't know if you've heard it, but it's amor fati, amor, fati, Fati. Anyone knows what it means?
What?
Amor fati, amor.
Something about love.
Yep, and fati, Fati. Huh? Nope.
Yourself. Isn't that
Nope.
word mean like to make? Isn't that like a verb to make?
No. It's very similar to the English, actually. There's a
Fate.
fate. Love your fate. Okay? This is Stoic philosophy, right? Stoic philosophy. I guess I'll summarize a little bit because, well, Nietzsche is really, in my view, a modern Stoic, right? Stoic philosophy is really the idea of loving your fate. In other words, wherever you are, the gods have put you there for a reason, right? There is, I think we saw something similar with Ecclesiastes. Tao Te Ching also has this idea that the universe is intelligent, right? There is a design, not only to nature, but a design to our lives, right? And so if we trust this design, we will always accept wherever nature has put us, right? So if I'm in a position of inferiority, or if I'm in a position like a wilderness, or if I'm doing great, or if I'm struggling, all of this is part of this grand design. And so we learn to love our fate, right? Because we trust that the universe or nature has put us there for a reason, and there is a task to be accomplished in that moment. And so we don't resist it, we don't try to get out of it. And that's what it means to love your fate, right? And so we'll see with Nietzsche, right? Nietzsche also is coming from that tradition. And he is someone, honestly, who got the short end of the stick, right, when it comes to life. I mean, it depends, right? What you call, I guess, what you call happiness. Nietzsche, of course, is going to redefine happiness for us, but he went through a lot. We'll see that when we talk about his biography. This is someone who has really suffered, right? He had severe illness throughout his life, was confined in a wheelchair for part of it, died young, right? Never married, no kids, no family, right? So very solitary figure. But he's really going to show us, right, through his writings, this capacity to love your fate, right? How can we read this? How can we retell the story, right, in a way that we can love the fate? Okay. So, all right. So let's go into Nietzsche. Let's go first into the era, right, that he's a part of. This is very similar to Kant, right? If you saw, I mean, Nietzsche is right after Kant. Nietzsche is 1844, right? And Kant was somewhere in the, maybe 1 century earlier, right? And so same time of what we call with Kant, I think, the coming of age of humanity, right? This is a time where humanity is discarding the old traditions, is discarding the old scriptures, any type of external authority, right, is set aside for internal authority, right? We saw this with Kant, right? Kant was already doing that very nicely, right? And remember when he said in the text, neither heaven nor earth, right, can show us the way. The moral law is written within, right? So this is the same mentality, same epoch, where we are not going to rely on religion anymore or external authorities, whether it's scripture or the priest. We know that we can rely on ourselves. We have enough, Kant would say reason, Nietzsche would say creativity, right, to move forward on our own, right? And of course, we know where this is coming from. I think, I forgot what lecture I gave you for Kant, but we know that this kind of secularization of the European worldview came from a kind of, there were two reasons, right? There was the rise of science, and there was the kind of distrust distrust which had grown over the centuries about, the good of religion, right? So remember, Europe was really oppressed by the church. I mean, at least most people were, right? And so you have a kind of, distrust of religion, and at the same time you have the rise of science, where we realize, oh, we don't need religion anymore, we don't need God anymore to solve our problems, we can move forward on our own. So we saw that for Kant, we can do this morally too, right? Not just technologically or scientifically, but morally we can move forward on our own because we know deep down what is the right thing to do. And Nietzsche is going to be along the same line, right? He's going to say, we need to get rid of all the old values, and we're going to talk about that, how he formulates that, and we need to push forward and create new values, create a new approach to life, right? We need to move forward as artists and not as slaves, right? That's the distinction here. Make sure you write this down. For Nietzsche, we have to become artists who create our own destiny rather than slaves who follow whatever road has been paved, right? We need to create our own paths. So he's a precursor, clearly, of existentialism. Obviously, he's a precursor of Sartre. If you want to read a more radical notion of this idea of creating your own destiny, you have to read, what is the name of that book? Humanism is, oh my God, can't believe I forgot the name of that book by Sartre. Nobody knows, I suppose. Okay, I'll find it and tell you later. Right, so this is a very famous book by Sartre, S-A-R-T-R-E, right? One of the most famous existentialist philosophers, who basically says, right, we create our own lives. We are what we do. There is no preordained essence in us telling, right? There's no script that we're following. Whatever we do in life, that's what we become, right? It's very similar here to Nietzsche, right? That we become through creativity, and not through some preordained script, right? The key idea here is that for Nietzsche, as well as most of the moderns, we don't follow a script anymore. We move forward in life with a creative mindset. Okay, so cool. So let's do a little bit on his biography. So like I said, 1844 to 1900, that's his dates. Nietzsche was a musician too, as well as a philosopher. He was a pianist. He was pretty good. He was also a composer, not so good, right? I mean, it was okay. He kind of composed in the style of Liszt, if you know Liszt, kind of very kind of romantic, complex piano pieces. But yeah, he was a pretty good musician. He befriended one of the most famous and infamous musicians of the 19th century, which is Wagner, right? I don't know how many of you are familiar with Wagner. Yeah, Wagner was a very famous musician, but also very famous for his anti-Semitism, right? So Wagner would compose operas. Actually, you have this in the Harry Potter movies too. I'll come back to that. So these operas, right, where the gnomes were like caricatured as had the Jewish like he would put all the gnomes with Jewish facial traits, right? Long nose, bushy eyebrows, right? So he was constantly, making fun of Jews in his operas and, kind of, demonizing them and so forth. So there's a big problem with Wagner. And by the way, Harry Potter, to come back to the movies, did you see that? The bankers?
The goblins.
The goblins. What is that? Am I the only one who's like going?
Well, it's common for a lot of like mythical video games to portray goblins as bankers.
But goblins as Jews? Because that's what they look like.
No, that's just what a goblin looks like.
Well, no, we don't know what a goblin looks like.
I'm saying goblins are fictionalized characters that they're prevalent in multi.
I get it. But in the movies, they're depicted as a caricature of Jewish. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it is.
Am I completely alone here? Did you notice this? Did anyone make a remark about this issue in the Harry Potter movies, or am I all alone here with my? You never thought of it? Because right, when you look at the caricatures of Jews that Nazi Germany, right, the propaganda did, this is the same facial trait. I was like, what? And why are they bankers, right? Of course, the connection between Jews and money that has been part of the anti-Semitic history of Europe, right? So, anyways, so I was kind of shocked. Anyways, going back to Wagner, doing something similar.
Germany against the rest of Europe. So except this time they're fighting a war for blood instead of religion and ethnicity.
Oh, you mean in Harry Potter?
Yeah, but like
Oh, that's interesting. See, I haven't even thought of it like that. I'm still reading it like a child. But yeah, I
Yeah,
will.
like the villain in there, the guy who was the leader of Germany, wanted to, it's kind of like ethnocentrism, except for magic. He wanted to cure,
Oh
he wanted
yes,
to get rid,
purified. That's
he wanted to
right.
get rid of anyone who doesn't have magic.
Got it, got it. Okay, okay. So there is a theme, right? But I did not understand why, because Hollywood produced. Who produced this? Not Hollywood.
Warner Brothers.
It was a British
But
movie.
Hollywood is mostly
Yeah,
just
Hollywood would
mostly
never do
Jewish.
that.
No,
Yeah,
Hollywood is mostly Jewish.
Hollywood would never do that. It's a British production, which they're not aware of what's happening. Okay. So, anyways, back to Wagner. So Wagner, right? Very anti-Semitic, and Nietzsche was friends with him, but then he got really sick and tired of his anti-Semitism, and they actually parted ways. It's interesting. Speaking of anti-Semitism, Nietzsche's sister was also very, very anti-Jewish. In fact, she went to Argentina with her husband, and they created a kind of commune for, nationalistic Germans, kind of pure, a pure commune where the German blood would be preserved. So Nietzsche was just constantly harassing her about that. He couldn't stand nationalism, right? He really had, I mean, he would just demolish it each time he could, right? So anyway, back to Nietzsche, the musician. So anyways, he didn't continue in music. He continued actually in theology, interestingly, for a while. He also did Greek languages and literature, and that was his double major, right? Greek language and literature and theology. After the first year of theology in college, he dropped it because at the time there was a very famous book which came out called The Life of Jesus by David Strauss. Strauss, Strauss. And this was the beginning of the critical method, right? In the study of the scriptures, where you don't take the scriptures as being necessarily true. You try to look at where the scriptures are maybe adding things, subtracting this for political reasons, for reasons connected to power, right? So there was this idea that the text was embellished, or things were added to the original story so that Christianity could have a little more weight, could attract more people. So for political reasons, right? So, I mean, this was in the 19th century. Scholars started to read the text like this and started to decipher what is the original text and how was it embellished in order to have a better impact. So this guy, David Strauss, basically his idea was that the historical Jesus was true, and his teachings on ethics probably also true, but anything supernatural was added, right? Because it was added by the Christian writers to embellish, right? And to make the Jesus look kind of like a mythical figure so that there would be more followers, right? So, okay, so that was so actually it's quite a convincing theory, right? Especially since it aligns with reason, which is the climate of the times, right? I mean, anything that was irrational about Jesus is discarded as myth, right? And this really sits well, right, with the modern mindset, which is really saying that, all we have is reason, everything else is myth, right? So really, Nietzsche really appreciated that work, and after reading that work, he dropped out of theology. But this tells you that he had some theological interest, and you see throughout his works, even though a lot of his work is dedicated to bashing Christianity, there is also a certain amount of admiration for the figure of Jesus. Only Jesus. The Christians are all in the same bag, and they are persecuted in Nietzsche's text from beginning to end, right? They are really made fun of, right? And criticized. But when it comes to the figure of Jesus, there is a certain amount of intrigue, right? Nietzsche is intrigued. And it's interesting that he often compares Jesus to the figure of Dionysus, to the Dionysus, the Greek god Dionysus. And there are actually parallels. If we were to go into that, it's very interesting. Dionysus was the god of wine, the god of intoxication, the god of springtime, right? Basically the god of joy, the god where there are no boundaries, right? When you're intoxicated by wine, there's no boundaries left. You do all kinds of things that you wouldn't do, right? So, and in many ways, right, Jesus was this kind of, had this kind of aura about him, right? Breaking all the boundaries, going where he shouldn't go, talking to women, eating, drinking. First miracle, right, is about wine. So there are a certain amount of connections, right, between, I think, the god Dionysus and the figure of Jesus, which is why Nietzsche was kind of interested in it, right? He liked to see the two, and he merges them. Towards the end of his life, he just goes, he just merges the two figures. For him, they're one and the same manifestation of God. Interesting also, another interesting point with Dionysus is this very strange ritual in Christianity where you eat the body of Jesus and you drink the blood of Jesus, which is really, I mean, when Jesus first mentioned this to his Jewish public, they were like, a bunch of them just dumped him. They were like, oh hell no, this is getting weird and creepy, right? So a lot of us, right, if you're not used to this, it sounds very strange, right? This idea of eating the body of Jesus and drinking his blood. But actually, if you come from a Greek background, it makes a lot of sense. There was a ritual around the worship of Dionysus where they would kill a bull. And I think I told you this. Didn't I tell you this about Dionysus? Have I told you this already? Yeah, you remember? Do the rest of you remember? No?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the same idea, right? You kill a bull, and then you eat the bull, and you're supposed, as you eat, the bull represents Dionysus, and as you eat the bull, you are actually receiving the spirit of Dionysus. You are absorbing the god's power, right? So very similar in the ritual of the Eucharist in Christianity. This is kind of a Greek practice, right? That seems to have infiltrated into, I mean, Jews were Greeks at the time. They had been under Greek rule for centuries. So there is no surprise, right, that there would be some parallels. So anyway, so even though he's really going to, and you'll see in the text, right, he's going to be bashing a lot on Christianity, there is still a certain amount of admiration and respect for Jesus because of the connections with Dionysus, right? Remember, Nietzsche is, his first love is Greek, right? Greek language, Greek literature. So he's bringing the two together. Okay, so continuing on his biography. So anyways, in 1869, he becomes professor of Greek thought at the University of Basel, which is in Switzerland. And then the war breaks out, right? The war between France and Prussia. Prussia is the old name for Germany. In 1870, right? The war breaks out. And this is really for him, this is going to be a shift in the course of his life for the worse, right? Because during the war, his health is completely demolished, right? From the cold, from the stress, from the lack of nutrition, from the prostitutes, everything. He just catches all kinds of diseases, right? Diphtheria, dysentery, syphilis, right? And his health is completely destroyed by this war. And after that is when his health will begin to degenerate and he'll have to stop teaching. But actually, in a way, it's good because that's when he starts to write, right? Most of his books, including the book we're going to read, were written while he was sick, right? Which is paradoxical because the book we're about to read, the edition is the gay science, but better translation, obviously, is the joyous science, right? So he's right here. He is sick, right? And he's writing a book on joy, right? So very, I mean, Nietzsche really had such a powerful spirit, right? Nothing could crush this man, right? Whatever would come his way, he would just fight back. So here he is fighting back against the degenerescence of his body through creativity, right? He's writing most of his books at that time, right? Finally, the last book, is it the last book? No, one of his first books, sorry, his first book during that time that he wrote, this is right after he leaves his position, is The Birth of Tragedy. And I want to talk a little bit about that book because to understand that book, you will understand everything about Nietzsche. And you will understand also how to creatively engage with life, which is really what he's going to teach us. So Birth of Tragedy, make sure you write this down, 1872. Okay, so it's a book on art. So we might be thinking, well, why are we, why should we pause on a book of art? Well, we do pause on this book because for him, morality is art, right? We need to live our lives like a work of art. And he's echoing, or, I've heard the same idea, this is interesting, from Abraham Heschel, who is, an American Jew, very famous Jewish philosopher from New York, actually. And when he was about to die, his students asked him, "What is your advice for the youth? Right? What advice would you give to the youth?" And Abraham Heschel, right, who, by the way, was very was a was a friend of Martin Luther King, right? If you look at the marches, I think the march at Selma, he is marching right next to him, right? He was a Jewish philosopher and rabbi who was really engaged, right? So anyways, he's asked right before he dies, what advice do you have for the youth? And he says, I would beckon the youth to live their lives as though it was a work of art, right? I would beckon the youth to live their lives as though it was a work of art. So very similar to Nietzsche, and I'm sure he's familiar with Nietzsche, obviously, since he was a philosopher. So that's the idea. So in order to live our lives like a work of art, we need to know what good art looks like, right? And so it's important to stop briefly on this book and see how Nietzsche defines good art, because yes, there is bad art, and then we can begin to apply these principles to our lives, right? So, in The Birth of Tragedy, he talks about two Greek gods, Dionysus, and then, which we know already, so Dionysus is spelled Dyonissos, and Apollo, Appolo. Right? These are two opposite gods. And he says, when there is any work of art, these two gods must be present. In other words, these gods are like two forces that must be simultaneously present in any good work of art. So Dionysus, we know already, right? Make sure you write this down. God of wine, intoxication, excess, right? This is really passion, no boundaries, no limitations, right? This is kind of like chaotic God, right? God of chaos. Anybody know Apollo, what he looks like? Yes.
I'm not sure what he looks like, but I'm pretty sure he's the god of the sun.
Yes. Anything else? There's more. So sun, so light. What else is Apollo about?
Music.
Very good. And last thing?
I'm not sure, but is joy also associated with him?
I'm not sure about that one, actually. Medicine, Apollo. Music and medicine. Now, why music and medicine? In the Greek world, both music and medicine were narrated or were explored in the sense of harmony, right? So let me explain. So obviously, music, right? We study what makes a harmonious piece of music, right? If it cannot be dissonant, it's going to be nice, harmonious. So harmony, the laws of harmony. But then medicine, very similar to Chinese medicine in the Greek world, also had to do with the harmony of the body. And I think we talked about this, right, when we did the Tao Te Ching. We talked about the harmony between yin and yang. We talked about balancing the body so that we find happiness in that way, right? So the Greeks actually were very much influenced, I think, by this Eastern thought of balance. And so medicine in Greece was following kind of the Chinese principle of balance and also ethics, right? Since we know Plato talks about the balance between the three parts of the soul, and so does Aristotle, right? So Apollo is the god of balance, of moderation. And then next to him, Dionysus, the god of excess and chaos. Now, Nietzsche is saying every good work of art needs a little bit of both, a little bit of both. So can anyone explain to me how that works? How is a work of art both chaotic and harmonious, and why is that what makes a good work of art?
Does it have to do with the idea of interpretation? How every single piece of art is never interpreted the same way by two different people?
So that's more Kant, right? So here it's more about what makes a work of art come alive, right? You know how you have some art where you're like, oh, It doesn't touch you, right? And then there's some art which just like, like there's a vibration, there's a vibrancy to it, or it's alive. What makes it alive, says Nietzsche, is the fact that these two forces are at play in the work of art. So let's see if you can figure out what that means. How many of you did some music, like learned some music? One, just one. Okay, this is not enough. Need more examples. Let me think. How many of you have done any sort of art? So whether it's music or painting or poetry or 1, 2, 3. Okay. What did you? Let me ask you. What did you do?
A long time ago, like
Poetry. Okay, good. Lanera, what was it you did? A bunch of stuff. Okay. What was yours?
I've been practicing guitar.
Guitar. Okay, so music and poetry. And you?
Painting.
Painting. Okay. So let's start with music, and then I'll go with poetry. Music. Have you ever heard of somebody play with flawless technique, but you can't feel anything? Anybody went through this? Are you following what? Right? They're playing perfectly well, but you're not like, it's not reaching you, right? Or you have someone who's very passionate, but their technique is a mess. So it's like ruins everything. Okay, now look at, well, they play out of tune and right, or they're off rhythm, but they, like, you sense they have really, like, they just needed to practice a little more to get the piece right, right? Let's look at poetry. Okay, so you have a poem, right? And it's, let's say it's recited by the person, but you're not feeling anything. It's not really connecting to you. And then you have a poem which is really affecting you, right? Nietzsche is going to say the difference between being affected or not is whether they have both of these forces involved. So I'll go back to the example of music. If you only have Apollo at play, you'll have a very structured piece of music or a very structured piece of poetry, but it'll fall flat, right? There will be no passion, no blood, no flesh, right, in that work. So in order for it to be really, really good, you also need a certain amount of inspiration, of passion, of rage, right? How many of you have seen spoken word poetry performed here in New York City? This is the place, guys. This is New York culture. You need to get with it. Okay, everybody now is required to go to the Nuyorican when it reopens. Maybe it's open already. And listen to some spoken word, New York spoken word poetry, right? This is really, really amazing, right? So you have, so any work of art, right? If you just have Apollinian, if you just have, the good technique and everything rhymes, but there's no passion or no flesh and blood involved, right? No spirit, it's going to fall flat. If you only have flesh and blood and passion, but no technique, no harmony, it's also not going to work, right? You need a little bit of both. And that's what Nietzsche says is a work of art. Now, we can already directly apply it to life. What does it mean to live life artfully when we know that a good art always has these two forces in interplay? How would you interpret that with regards to living your life? Yeah, you could say that. I mean, that's the theme of the class, right? I wasn't thinking of that, but yeah, you could say that. You need both the pain and the pleasure, and so the pleasure would be Apollo, the pain would be Dionysus, and it's the blend of the two which makes for an artful life. I never thought of it like that. That makes sense, actually. It's closer to what I was thinking. Very nice. Good, good. Any other way to put it? There are other ways to put it. Yes.
maybe like in a career context, you can't just be confident, you have to have drive too, or, you just fall flat.
Right, or you can't just be qualified, right? You have to also have a personality, charisma, right? If you come to an interview and you have like your perfect suit and, and you don't have that thing, that passion. We did some interviews for new professors a few years ago. You now have a new Greek philosophy professor, which we liked, but there was one candidate, he came, and he was perfect. He had a nice suit, he knew his stuff, his research was, amazing. But all of us were bored when he would open his mouth. He would sit there and be like, God, when is he going to stop? So he was immaculate, but he lacked the Dionysian, right? And then you have other candidates who are all over the place, right? They have tons of ideas and they're just all over the place and they just lack structure. So you're like, wait, your students are also gonna like zone out if you talk like that, right? So finally we found the perfect combination. It's Professor Tumi, who is your Greek philosophy professor, who has both a very Apollinian, but also has, the love of teaching and is a passionate teacher, right? So okay, that was just a plug for Professor Toomey, right? So that's the idea, right? So Toomey, I know I've been saying Taomi, and I till I saw how it was written. Then I was like, oh, it's a two, it's not Tao. Okay, good. So say again what you said, so I can recap it for everyone.
You can't just be, I'll add what you said too. You can't just be confident and qualified at something. You need to have that personality.
Exactly, right? You need a little bit of charisma, a little bit of passion, and then you need the qualifications, right? It's not enough to be qualified. So for a job interview, it's not enough to be qualified. You need to be passionate about it. Likewise, not enough to be passionate. You need to be qualified, right? Very good. That's a good mixture of both. What else? How else could we interpret this? Is anything forbidden in such an ethics? What do you think? So we're used to things being forbidden, right, in the Judeo-Christian ethic, which Nietzsche is going to demolish. But is anything forbidden when you live your life as a work of art? Is there anything you shouldn't do?
With that, I don't think that there's really banned, because an art normally is just an expressive way of showcasing an idea. There's no limit to that.
Exactly, right? Art, there is no morality when it comes to art, right? In fact, Nietzsche says a beautiful thing about that. He says, beyond good and evil, there is beauty. Write this down because this is such a powerful quote, and it so really summarizes his view on life. Beyond good and evil, there is beauty, right? In other words, we're not going to talk anymore about good and evil. This is too narrow. This is too restrictive. We need to talk about beauty. That's the new morality that he's trying to teach us. Live your life with beauty and you will be fine. So yes, you're right, Ojuma, there is no right and wrong. It's all about how you put it together, right? So in other words, right, we are taught certain things are wrong, and Nietzsche would say, no, everything is part of life, and you want to be able to taste of everything, but you must taste of it in moderation, right? Well, maybe not. Nietzsche sometimes is also about excess, right? So he's simply saying there's no right and wrong because everything in a way is a part of life. And what is right and wrong for Nietzsche is living or not living, right? So the idea really, we'll see, is to really live artfully in a way that embraces all opposites. That's really, I think, Azerad was pretty close when he said it's trying to embrace the pleasure and the pain. Beauty is about embracing opposites, bringing opposites together, and that's how we ought to live, right? In a way that is not saying this is bad, this is good, or I'm just going to do this but not going to do that. It's about really eating the whole pie, right? Eating the whole dinner, drinking the whole cup, right? And that's how you really supposed to live. So, okay. So, excellent. So let's go briefly into his philosophy, and then we can call it a day. So there's we're going to see three movements as we get into his work. The first one is God is dead, right? The God is dead statement, right? This is, I think it's in our text that we have the very famous statement by Nietzsche that God is dead. And then right after that, he says, the sea, the open sea lies before us. The sea, S-E-A, right? The ocean. He says, God is dead. The sea, the open sea lies before us. And so here we really have an attempt here by Nietzsche to move beyond the good and evil, kind of a paradigm of morality, paradigm of living your life. Okay, I'm going to do the right thing and I'm not going to do the wrong thing, and I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to do that. And Nietzsche basically is saying, no, you need to move beyond this. We need to grow up in a way. We need to stop avoiding life and really penetrate life fully, right? That's really his idea. And for him, the issue we'll see with Christianity is that it is really blocking access to a whole part of life that we are not allowed to explore for Nietzsche, right? So and we'll see that more when we do the text, but he has a huge grudge against Christianity in the sense that it is blocking access to a whole dimension of life. A whole part of life is blocked off, right? Because it's considered wrong. So we're going to look at that. And then, of course, for Nietzsche, we're going to see the next step, right, will be, of course, if there is no more God, if there are no more rules, if there's no more good and evil, well, what now? How are we going to live in such a world, right? Is this a world that we want, right? When there's no more laws or rules or, judgments of the sort, right? So he's going to really ask, right, how do we find our way without the ancient voices guiding us, right? How do we find our way without the ancient voices guiding us? And so the last part will be really for him, we need to move forward as creators of our destiny, right? We need to create new values. And that's the idea here with Nietzsche. We need to really create new values, values of embracing rather than values of cutting off, right? For him, Christianity is all about cutting ourselves off from the world. We need to be, I know Christians say we need to be in the world but not of the world, but very often Christianity ends up being out of the world altogether, right? You have, and this is not, relegated to Christianity. You see this with Islam, with Judaism, this idea that we need to separate from the world, and this whole thing we can never see or do or enter. We need to separate and be holy, right? And Nietzsche is going to really go against this ethos and say, why? Why are we considering that life is not holy itself? Why is there just holiness over here? Why is not all of life holy? In another text, he talks about the deification of life, right? He says, we need to start to see gods everywhere. This is very Greek, by the way. I think it was either Thales or Heraclitus who said, everything is full of gods, right? Who was it? Anybody do the pre-Socratics? Was it Thales or Heraclitus who says everything is full of gods? Okay, never mind. So one of the pre-Socratics, right, was saying everything is full of gods. So if everything is full of gods, right, everything is holy, everything is sacred, let's not be afraid to engage with life, right, and to really enter life rather than constantly separating off and avoiding it, right? So that's really the idea. So he's actually going to come up with a kind of new twist on ethics instead of what we call ethics of quality, which is the ethics of I want to have a quality life, therefore I will not make certain wrong choices. I want to have quality life. I want to be happy, right? So therefore I'm not going to make all these stupid choices so that I can have a good life. And he's going to say, no, let's move to an ethics of quantity, right? Let's just live the most possible, the fastest possible, the most possible experiences. Let's just enter life, right? Like, you know how some people enter the ocean? There's two kinds of people who enter the ocean. The first kind is like dipping in little by little, right? No, first kind doesn't even go in the ocean. Did you notice when you go to the beach, like 99% of the people don't go in the water?
It's dirty.
Why is that?
It's just dirty.
In Brighton, beach is dirty, but there are other beaches that are better. What?
Fear.
Huh?
Fear.
Exactly. It's strange, right? I'm the only one there with the kids, right? So, right? People don't go. Exactly. They're afraid of. People live life like this. Like, I'm just going to sit on the shore. I'm not venturing in there. And then you have those who kind of run in the water, right? This is what Nietzsche is saying. Let us run in the water. Let us stop being so fearful. Let's just run into this life, right? Instead of being there staying on the beach or dipping a little bit at a time, right? So this kind of, this is a really passionate man, right? So he's always going to be doing everything in an excessive way. Okay, so that's kind of where we're headed together in this kind of a chaotic journey with Nietzsche. Just a few words now on his writing style, because he always gets complaints. I always get complaints, rather, about his writing style. So I'm going to clarify a few things. Okay, so first of all, you need to understand Nietzsche is not he's not sitting there to make arguments. He's not interested in convincing you. He's interested in shocking you. Okay, so once you accept that, you're gonna get it. You're gonna be able to flow better, right? Nietzsche is not interested in convincing you. He has zero arguments, by the way, in his work. There are no arguments. He's not interested in laying out an argument why what he's saying is true. He is interested in shocking you through his inappropriate, unpolitical correct rhetoric. Okay, so he's on purpose going to be unpolitical correct. How do we say that?
Politically incorrect.
Yes, thank you. Politically incorrect on purpose, right? He's going to be in your face. He's going to make caricatures of Christianity that will make your skin crawl, right? It's such a caricature. But all of what he's doing is there to just shock you out of your apathy and get you to think about your own life, right? So really what he's doing is a kind of yeah, I mean, I compare him to stand-up comedy, like the kind that used to be able to happen without being canceled. So now it's very sad what's happening. I have to say this, that even sense of like even comedy now is under scrutiny, whereas comedy was the last place where we could really like just make fun of everything and of everybody, right? It was a kind of very, very sacred space where there were no kind of like art, right? There's no right and wrong, right? So now, sadly, comedians have to watch what they say. But originally, comedy was meant to be a space where you could say anything and get people thinking in that way, right? So Nietzsche is really like that. He's a kind of Dave Chappelle of philosophy, right? That's what he's doing. He's gonna be telling you in the most in-your-face way, but in order to make you think. I don't know if you saw the last Dave Chappelle. Who knows Dave Chappelle, right? You saw I saw one of his recent ones that were criticized, but it's very interesting. He starts out by making fun, right, of the LGBTQ community, but then he finishes with a very poignant story about a trans comedian friend of his, right? So in the beginning, everybody's like, yeah, those dumb suckers, right, and so forth. And then little by little, he shifts the audience. They're forced to follow. He puts them in a place where they have empathy for a trans comedian, right? So it's very interesting the way that he shifts the audience, that he starts where the audience is, which is transphobic and homophobic and so forth. You can hear it in the way that they're cheering. And he brings them against their will to a place of empathy, right? This is, Nietzsche is not so empathetic, but it's kind of the similar idea. He will shock you out of your wits in order to force you to respond and to think, right? So that's the way he writes. So don't try to see anything, in there. Don't try to look for arguments, or don't get offended by the way that he just hurls stuff at you, right? Because that's what he's doing. He's the elephant in the china shop, or the bull rather. He's the bull in the china shop. He's on purpose hurling things at you. In a very caricatural way. It's not nuanced. It's offensive, right? Especially if you're a Christian. But it's there to make us think, right? He's that friend of yours, that friend who's always making fun of you, but is actually making fun of you to help you grow, right? So that's the idea. So really read him. I think to really appreciate Nietzsche, one really has to develop a sense of humor. If you don't have a sense of humor, you're not going to appreciate. So if you don't have a sense of humor yet, develop one and then go to the text. Don't go before, right? Because you really have to read Nietzsche with a grain of salt, and not taking him too seriously, but at the same time, allowing yourself to be stimulated, right, by what he's saying. Okay, good. Yes, Nietzsche certainly would have been canceled if he had been among us today. So yes, it's very nice to have someone larger than life like that finishing our class. Okay, good. So I'm done with what I wanted to say. Enjoy your text. I'll see you next week. And we have next week left, and that's it. 2 Nietzsches, and then the test, and then we're done.
Well, Professor, when is our last